Hello, everyone! Welcome to the Chaotic Wholesome Talk Show. We're a little more chaotic than wholesome today, I'm gonna be honest. We've both had a week, um, but we're here, and you're here, and
It's almost
happy
Tuesday.
Pride, everyone!
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride. So, as always, I am Kay Purcell. I'm your host for this show. I'm here with my co-host, David Lee, right over there, Mr. Full Rubber Ducky himself. Um, This is going to be a shorter episode because the Rainbow Roll is happening tonight. And for those of you who don't know, this is something I'm so excited. Ooh, I can't believe we pulled it off. We are doing 4 Thirsty Sword Lesbian one-shots, all themed around Pride for charity. All donations go. Happy Pride, Domo! Domo did amazing graphics for the Rainbow Roll. They look amazing. I can't wait to put one of the graphics that he made on my TikTok. But guess who is not great at TikTok? This one. I'm not. Like I said, more chaotic than wholesome today. Join us over at twitch.tv/ToddMoonbounce every Tuesday this month for a thirsty sword lesbian game. Holy cats, do we have people playing? I'm just gonna go down this list because our hostess with the mostest and GM for 2 of the games is Candace the Magnificent, aka that Candace girl. We've got the Hype Goblin, Prince X Calamity, Lizard Librarian, Aldermancy, Naomi Kyle, Connie Chang, myself, Jen Mack, who's been on here before. April Kit Walsh, the creator of Thirsty Sword Lesbians, is going to be running one of the games. Maddie Matihi, Katie Osaurus, B. Zelda, The Mini Arcanist, Jade Valkyrie, Countess Cassie, and Carrie Smith. And oh my goodness, we'll never get over the amazing talent we have. Please don't miss it. It's going to be amazing. 8 p.m. Eastern over at Todd Moonbounce. And Full Rubber Ducky put that in the chat. Thank you, David. You're the best. I'm also having, we're doing this. All the episodes this month of Chaotic Wholesome are going to be a little short because I'm helping pull off the Rainbow Roll. So I bounce after this and go get ready for that setup. However, I'm also doing some other stuff. Every Wednesday, from the for 3 more weeks, so tomorrow and 2 weeks after that, you can come right here at 7 p.m. for Strixhaven Fractal Convergence. That is a homebrew Strixhaven game run by the other side Steve, who's in chat right now. Jump 1,000 years into the future of Strixhaven for it's a heck of a story. Let's put it that way. We threw Steve for many curves, and it was quite fun. And then later this month, on the 22nd, you can find me in the Emergency Power podcast. That will be my first episode. Yes, and David, you're just a king, and got the link to the first episode in the chat right there, right now. I'm having a month. It's going to be amazing. It's also my birthday month. I'm also in the middle of moving my entire office. I've also got a brand new kitten. Sleep is not happening. There's a lot going on. It's an interesting time to be me. David, what are you up to? Anything you can share?
Nothing that I can share yet, other than I'm excited to see all the things that are happening. I'm excited to see Candace's game tonight. I'm excited to tune into episode 2 of the Strixhaven game tomorrow. And there are a bunch of other actual plays from way too many people to try to remember and name. That are all happening this month. I just leave my computer on, leave my speakers going, and get to almost around the clock.
Yes. That's basically, yeah. Oh, I should put on my It's Pride. So, speaking of Pride, yes, Fractal Convergence. Hold on. The other co-host is officially here. This is
Yes.
Gilmore, for those of you who have not met him. He's probably going to be hanging here most of the time. So, it being Pride, I wanted to talk a little bit about representation. Now, I sprang this on David right before we went live. And I want to read this excerpt to you all, because this has nothing to do with representation except...
We
It's just, it has to do with TTRPGs, and it's just my favorite bad quote of the day. And I need you all to just hear a David reaction. We need to start with that spice today, because my energy level needs it. I know I seem like I'm full of energy. No, I'm crashing. This is me hanging on by my teeth. This is a news article from NBCnews.com, and I'm only going to read one sentence of it, because that's all you need. A year ago, Murray couldn't have dreamed that his son could get money for college by playing Overwatch, a kind of digital Dungeons and Dragons with laser battles.
There are too many things to unpack here. One, Overwatch, while the term has been coined diarrhea Christmas lights, it does have diarrhea Christmas lights. However, very few characters have a laser.
Yes.
Two, there are actual video games based on tabletop systems, including but not limited to Baldur's Gate, Baldur's Gate 2, Neverwinter Nights, and so
Etc.
not Path of Exile, because that's a whole different thing. Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, which if you have not played are brilliant games. But it's like, you have, and I understand that the line between genres has been blurred over the past couple of years as game developers try to incorporate more elements into, but to have none of them, and then to conflate competitive gaming and Dungeons and Dragons is the exact opposite of competitive gaming.
Look, it's like, my job for a while was explaining League of Legends to non-gamers. Like, that basically summarizes 80% of my time working at Red Bull Gaming, right? And I'm like, it is capture the flag with teams of 5 in a video game. You say that, people get it, right? There's ways you can explain things. Overwatch? Dungeons and Dragons with lasers? Yeah, David's passion about everything that even mildly offends him is just delightful. It's one of my favorite things on the planet.
I need to, 1, make an artificer, 2, make a paid appearance, and 3, have that artifice invent lasers.
Yes.
So that I can at least make part of that sentence correct. And Forbes was bad enough before, but then they went to this model of contracting all their articles out. So if you want to be published on Forbes, you just slide them a crisp C note and they will publish your article under their name. But they've started publishing video game basically opinion pieces. And when your level of video game journalism is below Forbes, you have a real problem.
So, that was a complete tangent, except for, I guess, the fact that, here's how we'll tie it. Here's how we'll tie it in. When the thing that you are is not represented, it's obvious. When someone is talking about something that you are and don't know what they're talking about, we know.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to talk today in our shorter session about representation in TTRPGs and media as a whole, right? And I feel like, especially those of us who have a marginalized identity in some way, we remember the first time we see ourselves. But also, I feel like there are moments when you're like, oh yeah, like, my favorite example, and this blows a lot of people's minds, I learned, really, like, I knew the word, but I learned what gay was because of Final Fantasy VII. And that will always stand out to me in my mind, that game series, that game, and it wasn't into. I mean, I don't
No,
know.
no. Tell us how your your blossoming ace sensibilities led you to this discovery.
So, um, I played a lot of TTRPGs. I was playing as Cloud, and all of these girls were really aggressively hitting on me, and I wasn't into it as Cloud or as me. Um, and as I was playing through the game, uh, I apparently picked the very worst answer I could give to every female character every time. Because when I got to the gold saucer, I went on a date with Barrett. And I'm like, this is weird and interesting. And like, it was very clearly awkward and weird, but like, Cloud was a little. Barrett's reaction, if you haven't. I feel like most people didn't see this, because you literally had to do the worst thing you possibly could every single time to unlock this. Like, Cloud's always like. I mean, Cloud is Cloud. But Barrett's like, and like being his shy self. Like, he's not being grumpy about it, he's being shy about it. And I'm like, something interesting about Barrett here.
Mm-hmm. Because he's into it.
And then, now I'm going to be kind of careful here, because even though Final Fantasy VII has been out for ages, Remake Chapter 2 is about to happen, and I know several people, including a few who watched this stream, have not played the original still. Or at least had not last time we spoke, or were planning to. So I'm going to be a little bit careful, but there's an arc with Barrett that happens after that. And I challenge you to go back, and if you don't replay the game, because Final Fantasy VII is a very hard game to replay, because graphics are really difficult.
Not just graphics, but a lot of quality of life updates in terms of user interface have happened in the past 20 years. More.
But there's
25
a
years.
thing that happens with his partner, a character from his past. And you can't tell me they're not a couple. You cannot tell me. Like, even now, looking as a kid, I'm like, they're real close. As an adult, I'm like, oh, that's how he got the kid. That makes sense. The graphics were amazing at the time. Now, like, that's the thing. I've gone back and tried to replay it several times, and like, it's not so much the standard. It's like the maps. Trying to figure out where to go on a map, my brain can't with the super low poly anymore. I can't. I just can't. I can't navigate the game anymore. But yeah, so that was kind of like my. Oh, and then the whole thing with the sailor suit.
Listen, I'm still gonna get one of those. It's gonna be great.
This man, I'm not holding him to it, but this man made me a promise that for my birthday, he was going to cosplay me some Barrett, potentially in a sailor suit.
The money has not lined up for it yet, but I am going to launch an OnlyFans so that I can get the money for said sailor. But no, if not for this birthday, the sailor suit Barrett will show up, because that's got to happen.
I'm so excited. So, David, and are you okay with my calling you out and asking you to tell a story about yourself, about a personal thing that, like...
Yeah.
So, like, I remember having these kind of moments of, like, oh, that's what that is. Oh, that person is that. Okay, that makes sense. But sometimes, I'm an X-Men girl. I grew up with a lot of understanding around, oh, all these people represent being queer or being gay. But I don't know if anyone in the audience maybe has noticed or not, but you're black.
They may have missed that.
And I remember very early on in our relationship, before we'd even met, like when we were still just internet friends, I nagged David to watch The Dragon Prince. And we won't go into the reason I told you to watch The Dragon Prince. Yeah, we're not going into it. We're not doing that.
Oh, oh,
Yeah, we're not
oh,
ready for
oh,
that yet.
oh.
No, we are not that chaotic today.
Listen, if I think it's episode 3 where it happens.
Yeah.
If you go back and watch Dragon Prince season 1 and you get to the end of episode 3, you will know what we're talking about.
Um, but I remember, like, I was like, hey, watch that. Like, it's a cartoon, right? And I made my favorite joke about the Dragon Prince is they have amazing horny Irish elves because the elves have horns. They're
They do.
great. I love them. I love their elves so much. Um, but I had nagged David, watch this show, watch this. It's a cartoon, watch it. And I just remember this moment when he replied, he's like, that kid, like that kid's the prince. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I've never seen anyone with my hair before.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because in the run up to the show, I was thinking a lot about like representation of black people in non mainstream media, like in nerd culture. And a couple episodes ago we talked about Storm,
Mm-hmm.
um and my brain kind of spiraled, um when it comes to, so there's this element of non racially specific characters that are coded as black.
Mm-hmm.
Like many dudes I've talked to have been like, um this Father's Day, make sure you thank Piccolo from Dragon Ball Z, because he was everyone's black dad back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, whoa, he really was like Black Daddy. Um, and a friend of mine is so hooked on Keith David's performance as Goliath in Gargoyles. But then I thought about it and thought about it, and there are two main instances that pop up, and one is representation in science fiction,
Mm-hmm.
and that goes back to Star Trek: The Next Generation. Part of why I was such an enormous fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation is not just because Worf was a bridge officer,
Mm-hmm.
but because a nerd, a turbo nerd,
Mm-hmm.
a nerd that was so nerdy that he was nerdier than the robot that was made to process information, was a black guy, like, and was in charge of making everything go.
I broke David the other day because we said something about Dr. Pepper, and he's like, "Oh, so you like prune juice?" And I'm like, "Yes, it's Warrior's drink." And he's like, "This is why we're friends."
Right. And not just how rounded all the characters were in Star Trek, like especially Geordi. He and I both have had terrible luck with women for a very long time.
Well, we know why
Um,
Jordy did.
yes. But he also did some real incel shit,
Yeah,
and I'm not gonna forgive him for that.
yeah. I mean, he
Especially
also
when
was
the
so
real life
focused on trying to
counterpart
get.
was
He was trying
hotter.
so hard to get some data. He was trying so hard to get a piece of data,
I
and
mean,
so in denial.
Data, Data.
Data could
All
get
you
it
had to
from
do was
anyone.
ask him, because Tashiara basically was like, "Yo, get in here, get in here to do the thing."
And yes,
Um,
gargoyles, uh, Goliath.
right, top notch.
Yes.
But I was thinking about like fantasy representation, because you sit and read Lord of the Rings, and there's no one in Lord of the Rings that's coded black, and you read a lot of the great fantasy.
They're not anyone you want to be related to, though.
Oh,
All of
oh
the
yeah,
orcs and all of
yeah,
the yeah, they were black coded.
yeah. The fighting Urukai were
Mhm.
definitely.
Mhm. Mm-hmm.
Ooh, yeah, I forgot about that.
You and Tolkien are gonna fight.
Yeah, but um, many of the great and quote unquote great fantasy series from the 80s and 90s, whether you're talking Sword of Truth, Wheel of Time, um, other series that I'm blanking on right now, none of them are coded black.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading Tales from Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, who obviously is a Nebula Award winner. What's the other one that's paired with the Nebula? There's another big sci-fi award, and she's world famous for her sci-fi. But her fantasy stuff was equally as powerful and well executed. And I remember reading um, Tales from Earthsea and the sort of like granddaddy wizard dude. I remember thinking to myself, I was like, huh, there's something I like about him, but I can't put my finger on it because I was like, 12 or 13 at the
Mm.
time. And then they had the sci-fi back when it was sci-fi and not sci-fi uh, TV series, and it was played, and the character was played by Danny Glover, and I was like, that's what it is. He strikes me as like someone's uncle or grandpa or something. And at least in fantasy, and again, there have been many multiracial fantasy characters
Mm-hmm.
since then. But the first time I came across someone as coded black in the pages of the book was during Tales of Earthsea from Ursula K. Le Guin, which was written, I think,
Oh.
in the 70s.
And I'm going to backtrack just the tiniest bit to Star Trek. And I know I sent this to you earlier, but I'm gonna drop it in chat. This is my favorite like thing, and it's what was Jadzia's mentor? I don't remember. Her Klingon
Curzon. Oh
Curzon.
no,
No,
no, Jadzia was Curzon,
right. And
um,
it's
and
it's
it's not Core.
Core. It's Core and Jadzia when he sees her for the first time since she got the new host, and he's hugging her. He says, "Curzon, my beloved old friend," and she says, "I'm Jadzia now," and he says, "Jadzia, my beloved old friend." And this was reposted with this Pride Month. Never forget that Klingons had trans rights. No hostility, no confusion, no clumsy excuse filled justification, just a quick self correction and the exact same amount of love and respect as before. Cis allies, be like Core.
Right.
Such a beautiful little setup. Um, so, yes, I just wanted to throw that out there. As bad of a rap as, I mean, Star Trek often gave the Klingons, Klingons also got it right. A lot.
So I have a lot of respect for Gene Roddenberry, but he and I might do 3 rounds in a boxing ring
Mm.
because like the way he coded the Romulans, the way he coded the Klingons, it's like, sir, this really? But then also you think about it, and it was the 60s, and so many things on the original series were so progressive.
Yeah.
And I think um people really underestimate because there are all these assumed tropes and cliches from Star Trek that really aren't true
Mm-hmm.
if you sit down and watch them. For instance, they portray Captain Kirk as someone who just sleeps with anyone. And you go back and you watch the original series, and the person who was getting all the tail was Scotty. And like Captain Picard slept with way more people on the show than Captain Kirk did. And Captain Kirk kept saying, like women would be like, "Hey, let's do this thing," and he kept being like, "No, I can't do this. I'm busy." Um, and or this is wrong. And so like bodily autonomy and recognizing a woman's right to choose and recognizing that When you're compelled to do something, it's not okay to take advantage of that, and recognizing imbalances of power. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like the whole first season, the yeoman had a thing for Kirk, and he kept playing it off like it wasn't a thing because he didn't want to get her in trouble, and because he couldn't pursue that relationship because of the power. So
Besides, we all
all
know he
these
was saving himself for Spock.
listen, he's not gonna Spock and McCoy are not ready to open up for a threesome, okay?
No, they're not.
Kirk could just watch from afar. Um, and the amount of flirting that they did on that show is just unconscionable.
Yeah.
Um, and so even from the earliest days of science fiction, so like science fiction has always been a platform to explore the struggles that we have in our society and culture through fiction. Um, and like I learned what non-binary was from right every 7 years.
7 years, spot on, Steve.
So remember in the episode that had the epic fight music, S- uh, um, Spock had the Ponfar and Kirk fought him, but at the end of it, he was laying in Scotty's arm, or not Scotty, in McCoy's arms, looking up at McCoy, and McCoy was like, "Spock, are you okay?" And I'm like, "Bro, you guys gonna kiss? Because now's the time." Um, but like I learned what non-binary was from Star Trek: The Next Generation. Um, you know, with Jadzia and Curzon, and then what's the third Dax? I should know this.
Jadzia Curzon.
Because played by Nicole DeBoer.
Yes.
Um, I'm mad that I remember the actress's name, but not the character's name. But
It. Yeah.
um, but like looking back, that was one of my earliest exposures to the idea of transitioning. And yeah, it's explored in a science fictiony way. Um, but like, you know, yeah, Ezri Dax.
Esri, thank you.
Um, there are so many times where Star Trek takes these things very seriously,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Bugs Bunny would put on a dress and throw on some lipstick to bamboozle Elmer Fudd for a laugh. Um, and yeah, just across most, if not all, the series, or at least all the series I've seen, because I'm behind on it. Um,
Big same. It's a shame.
right? Because
Gotta fix that.
who can have 7 streaming services at once? Anyway, um, but there's this deep exploration into um, autonomy and the sorts of people that we're supposed to be, and it's all based around this idea of acceptance and love and understanding and respecting boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like The Next Generation is the first time on a TV show that I saw a relationship go south and then an awkward love triangle and an awkward polycule happen where everybody was okay.
Mm.
Like Worf, the most violent person on the show, didn't just meet Riker outside the ship and punch him to death because they were both after Marina Sirtis.
Yes.
Mm, but you know who I'm talking about. I can't remember. Counselor Troy.
Yes. And poor Troy.
Um,
I I loved Troy. I really did. But she really did get dumber the lower her neckline got. Like you could tell, like if you just watch the series at any given point, you can tell if she's going to be smart or dumb by if you can see her cleavage or not. If you can see her cleavage, she's going to be dumb the entire episode. If her cleavage is covered, she's fucking brilliant. I'm so pissed at
and
those writers. I will never forgive next gen writers for that.
but here's the thing. So they started off bad with
Yeah.
Troy, and
Yeah.
there are all sorts of like restrictions and expectations they have of her. So like Troy is supposed to have this like obsession with chocolate, and the whole reason Troy gets her own outfit um as the ship's counselor is because she was too curvy for the uniform. Because let's also remember in the first season they were unitards.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, top and pants. It was just like one thing that zips up. Or if you were a lucky crew member, it was the dress.
Yeah.
And plenty of dudes look great sporting this. Actually, that's another thing I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go to a Star Trek convention with like the season one, no, season two, Next Generation
You've seen me in
dress.
mine.
We're not gonna talk about that. Um, but yeah, so she was too curvy for the uniform. And by the way, go on YouTube, look up her speaking. She's super super brilliant, very funny,
So
very
intelligent.
charming. Um, and she's like, how am I supposed to eat all this chocolate and then like be stick thin? Like that's not gonna happen. And so they originally put a lot of pressure on her to lose weight and conform. And she's like, look, this is how I'm built. It's how it's gonna be. And eventually she pushed and pushed and pushed that the writers and like the writing room eventually started to accept that Troy was not going to have this body dysmorphia, and also that she wasn't a dingbat.
Yes.
um
And
and so
those dresses definitely do not have pockets. I have gotten the sewing patterns for all of the original because I sew and I wanted to make my own, and most of those
no
dresses are
pockets.
ridiculously complex to make. They are not. They are simple dresses. You shouldn't know the pattern, but they're ridiculous patterns and there are no pockets. And
That's
that's
just
just a
it.
crime. It's just a crime.
No, she is absolutely in the show. Her rank at the start of the show is lieutenant commander. She's technically she was, so in the hierarchy she wasn't third in line for command until after she passed the command course. However, her rank was high enough for her to be part of the command hierarchy. So at the start of the show it's like, captain, first officer, and then depending on the situation it is tactical officer, chief medical officer, or chief engineering officer. um but they had a whole arc about this. They had, I think it was like 2 or 3 episodes where the character Troy was intimidated by taking the command test.
Mm-hmm.
um and and Riker and a couple other people were like, You're obviously more than prepared for this. You've actually had to take over the ship before. Go take it." And then she takes it and she nails it, and it's no problem. And then we see her in the Starfleet uniform when she gets a promotion, because chief medical officer, um, uh, chief engineer, and her special place as ship's counselor, because they put her there on the flagship, because the flagship is also an ambassador ship,
Mm-hmm.
um, are all lieutenant commander and higher.
I love how this entire episode has become Star Trek. That is not me being sarcastic. This is amazing. Chat is blowing up. This is awesome.
Um, and outside of Wesley Crusher, you don't have any major story arcs about advancement. Like, yes, Worf got promoted from he wasn't an ensign. He went
Oh
from,
yeah,
yeah, I think he was. No,
yeah.
he was an ensign in command, and then he got promoted to security team, and then he got promoted to lieutenant and head of security.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but
I think
the
Voyager had more about Voyager had a lot of headbutting about who's in command because of how Voyager came. But yeah, Voyager had a lot more about rank and promotions than Next Gen. Sorry, continue.
but the major story arcs about um, advancing in Starfleet revolved around Wesley Crusher and getting into Starfleet, and then um, Riker refusing to take to accept a promotion to command to a captain, but the advancement was with Troy. Troy's the only person in the series where they had a big focus on, okay, you are already an officer, you are already high ranking. Um, you know, are you going to work to take that next step? And more than anybody else on the show, Troy was fighting for that advancement while everybody else was static because Picard turned down an ambassadorship at least twice. Um, Riker turned down at least three captain's assignments to the point whereby a Starfleet admiral was like, "Look, if you keep saying no, they're going to stop asking,"
Yeah.
um, and so on and so on. And yeah, Wesley Crusher was acting ensign because nepotism, um, and he was also good at what he did. And then he went and became a cadet. And then when he was a cadet and he was on break, then he could come back and serve. Uh, yeah,
Lieutenant
Lieutenant
Junior
Junior
Grade.
Grade. Thank
Yes.
you. And Worf gets promoted to Lieutenant Commander when he goes to DS9.
Yes.
Ooh wee.
So, I'm going to quickly steer us away from Star Trek because unfortunately, I
I
did
can talk
not
about Star
see a
Trek all day.
representation of myself on Star Trek. At least not that I recognized. I should probably go back and rewatch a bunch of stuff. Um,
Yeah, because I'm getting very Ensign Rowe vibes.
I the first time I try to be pretty open about the fact that I'm asexual, aromantic. And the first time, oh, I should look up the correct name because I don't even know it. Fuck, what was it? Um the first time I saw myself represented, unfortunately, was a very terrible Sherlock Holmes show
Oh
that
boy.
we liked to call CSI Baker Street because it was an American version. It had, was it Lucy Liu
Oh,
as,
Elementary.
yes.
Oh, huh. That's
So
just terrible. I loved
for
every second of it.
for those of you who did not see it, number one, don't, unless you just really want to, unless you just really want to hurt yourself. Now, before I go on this rant, let me be very clear. There are all kinds of ace. There are all kinds of, it's a spectrum. Um, my experience as an ace person is not the same as another ace person. And looking back, I definitely understood. Like I loved Sherlock Holmes. I grew up with Sherlock Holmes. I love Sherlock Holmes. I think I understood subconsciously that Sherlock Holmes was ace before I had a word for it because Sherlock Holmes in the books was definitely ace. Fight me. Um, but the first time it was to me actually called out was in elementary, right? And he was very loud about, I'm ace. I'm married to my job. I'm ace. And that's fine. And then Watson shows up and is going to meet him somewhere and passes a hooker leaving his house. And she's like, I thought you were ace. And he's like, I am ace. I sleep with prostitutes so that I can focus on my job. Now I don't want to speak in super broad strokes. So I'm sure that there is someone out there who identifies as ace, and that is. But that representation made it really difficult for those of us who are ace and like, nah, I just don't seek it out. It doesn't occur to me that, hmm. So that was difficult. Say what you just typed, David.
Tell me you're a cishet writing an ace without telling me you're a cishet who's writing an ace.
Um, so I was real mad about that. I was big mad about that. Because again, I'm sure that's someone's story, but that is also the most difficult thing you could do for most ace folks. Um, and then I have to get mad again because I not only saw the I saw such a correct portrayal of being ace that I had a minor panic and yelled at my television, "Why are you saying those words? Those are mine." And it was Bojack fucking Horseman.
I was just gonna say.
That arc, and I don't want to say whose it is, because if you haven't watched Bojack, it is beautiful and depressing. It is beautifully depressing, and it is real and gritty, and yes, and it was horrifying to hear those words come out of that character's mouth, because that is how I'd felt for a long time, and I was so blindsided by it happening that I had to get up and turn off the TV. It was just not okay. And I had never, like, let me be clear, because part of the reason we're talking about representation and why it doesn't feel like it's that big of a deal until you've A, never seen yourself, or B, you have a reaction to realizing that this thing isn't exclusive to you, that this is a common thing. And it had never occurred to me that other people might share this experience and that questioning, and that it was such a surreal and deeply uncomfortable thing that, heck, why did it have to be Bojack Horseman? I mean,
yeah, why did it have to take so long?
Yeah, why did it have to take so long? And then, and again, let's be very clear. There's a lot of TTRPGs, so I'm not gonna say that this was by far not the first representation of an ace character. There have been lots of representations of ace characters across various plays, but and this is, if you're a huge fan of Critical Role and you have somehow not finished season 2, this is a minor spoiler, so run away right now. But in Critical Role season 2, Caduceus joined the party. They went all the way up to the north. They were going to hunt down Aor, and Matt Mercer throws this big beefy woman at Caduceus, who's all super into Cad, and Cad's just completely clueless about it. He's got no clue. And they leave, and Knott's like, "What the fuck, man? She wanted to get with you." And he's like, "What? No, I'm not into that. Nah. No, you all keep me plenty busy." And I was like, "Oh, my sweet baby is one of us."
Right.
And it was one of the really cool things is they were interviewing Taliesin after that about that, and he said, "I always just kind of thought that after the campaign and the season wrap up, I would be like, oh yeah, by the way, Cad was ace." He's like, "But I actually got to play it out in game, and that was super neat." And I just remember there was an explosion of people being super excited that they were ace, that he's ace. And then later on, they were interviewing Matt Mercer, or someone was asking Matt about Essek. And he's like, no, Essek has been with other people before, but it's been a long time. And he's like, and people started asking, more and more questions, and Matt's so responsive that he's like, yeah, it takes him a while to decide that he's attracted to someone. And everyone's like, "Oh my god, he's gray ace." And Matt's like, "What?" They're like, "Gray ace, that's a thing. It's gray sexual or gray asexual, where you don't develop romantic feelings towards someone or sexual feelings towards someone until you've developed a really solid relationship." And Matt's like, "Oh yeah, I guess that's what he is." And so it was just this explosion of excitement because we had an ace and a gray ace character, and it was just really, really happy. And I know there's others, but those were Critical Role is the big. And I'm just a fan. I don't know if you can tell from my background. I'm just a fan. So it's always nice to see it. Bojack does a great job representing a lot of very specific types of people. Yes, it really does. In the most cynical way possible.
Ooh, ooh. I have not finished BoJack,
It's tough.
but ooh wee, do I have a lot of comments about BoJack. I could do 2 whole episodes about BoJack, as I'm sure many people have, because BoJack is definitely one of those shows that gets everybody talking about it. But in preparation for the show, looking up, um, lists of black characters, gay characters, ace characters, um, and especially considering Pride Month, fantasy is still an area where so little um, of diversity, especially among the LGBTQ plus community, um, and it's it's frustrating because before I was born, you could see a not just a black person, but a black woman in a position of authority and importance in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to the point whereby Nichelle Nichols was like, I'm not really feeling it. And Martin Luther King Jr. himself was like, listen, you get back out there.
Yeah. Yeah, we need you on this show.
And that later
Please?
um, gave birth to a little girl who watched Uhura, who says, I want to be a black girl in space. And she became a black girl in space, and then was on an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation as a black woman in space who was also a black woman in space. And it's just, and I'm really lucky to have that, and my sister and my niece and so many black men and women are very lucky to have that. But when you look at fantasy, um there's way less representation, like
Or it's
um
bad representation.
yeah, and it is doubly and triply true for trans people, non-binary people. um a friend of mine, I was the first person he came out to in high school. And before he came out to me, he gave me what he told me was his favorite book series. And it was the last Harold Mage trilogy from Mercedes Lackey,
Those
which if
books
you haven't
destroyed
read it,
me. They destroyed me.
if you haven't, go read them. Go read them. And I
I'm
remember,
gonna tell a story after you finish yours.
and so I read them over the course of like 3 days because I was a teenager and I was at boarding school with no TV, so a lot of reading got done. Um, and I handed it back to him, and I was like, "Wow, these are great." Blah 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 blah. And he sort of like insinuated, he's like, "Well, what about like the characters who fell in love?" I was like, "Oh, that was adorable, that was fine." And it was the first time in a book that I had read about two men falling in love. And he was like, "You didn't think that was?" I was like, "Gay people are a thing," and I didn't think about it at the time. But he was like
Testing those
testing
waters.
me out and being like, "Yo, are you cool with this or are you not cool with this?" And I knew what and who gay people were before, and he wasn't the first gay person I'd ever met. But it was the first time that I had like clearly seen representation in sci-fi and fantasy, but also um it and I didn't even think about it. So when he came out to me later, I was like, "Oh, oh, that's part of why you like those books." Um, and not only did he feel comfortable coming out to me after that, but he also, and like years later, he told me, he was like, one thing I recognized was like, you didn't zero in on the gay thing. And when you were talking to me about it, you didn't think that I zeroed in on the gay thing too. I was like, well, that's because the books are amazing. Um, but just I'm glad that Kay and I are working together because I've said to people before, the space, the TTRPG space, especially online, especially when it comes to performances, is very new. Um, but research for this particular episode has reinforced the idea of how new and unexplored this space is and will be for some time. So if you have a character and you want to get into actual plays, there are tons of people who are looking for more diversity in their streams. And you never know if you are going to be the Lieutenant Uhura, if you are going to be the Todd for somebody else. So go for it. Is the point I'm trying to make?
So I'm gonna backtrack, then I'm spring onto that.
Yep.
So the Last Herald Mage trilogy is amazing, and you should read it. It was one of my favorite books through college, book series through college. Black Griffin. I started reading the Black Griffin way too young. I read the Griffin trilogy like 12. Definitely too young, but explains a lot about who and what I am. And then fast forward many years later, and I met Larry Dixon, who took me under his proverbial wing and was my mentor for many years. And for those of you who don't know, Larry Dixon co wrote The Black Griffin with his wife, Mercedes Lackey, who solo wrote the Last Herald Mage trilogy. So I meet Larry Dixon. I'm only mildly losing my mind. We become friend mentor relationship. We see each other once or twice a year for a decade. Um, and we're at a free comic book day event in Dallas, and I've got a table, and he's got a table, and Mercedes Lackey has a table. And he's like, come on, leave your table for a second. Let me come over, and I want you to meet my wife. Like, you're cool. She's cool. You should meet my wife. And I, of course, had brought my books. And so I'm like, will she sign my, will she sign? And he's like, of course. So I go up, and he does the whole thing. And I'm just looking at her, and I'm clutching this trilogy in my hands. And she's like, hi, Mercedes, it's so great. Larry's telling me how to da-da-da. And I open my mouth, and a demon crawls out of my throat and says, how could you do that to Vanielle? Who's the main character of that trilogy? And I'm like, I'm so sorry. She goes, no, it happens all the time. But yes, so as many of you know, during the day I work for video games. I work in video games, and I have worked in and around video games for like 10 years. It's been a very long time. I've been a journalist. I'm now working as a community manager on a AAA game. I've been in this space for quite a while. And there are a lot of genuine and honest efforts within video games to add more diversity. And there are a lot of those efforts being squashed for fear of backlash from the Gamergate bros, but also especially less diversity, but more a lot of accessibility, and a lot of those like, let's actually do more female lead characters, more or trans lead characters. That can be costly, and that there's a lot of fear of backlash. I've had people ask me, within gaming, are they really just trying to be diverse, like to like cash a check? And like, no, it costs more money to be diverse and welcoming and have accessibility. That costs money. That costs research. That costs focus groups. So there are people genuinely trying to do that and having those efforts pushed back on by other players. So it's not a publicity thing. Changes are being made in video games, and it's awesome. tabletop has started making changes much more recently, and the space is moving to be much more diverse, much, much, much more quickly. So if you're hanging out in chat, like if you're part of the Chaotic Wholesome crew, you know this. I know you already know this, and I'm preaching at the choir. But a lot of times I like to say these things in case someone stumbles onto the VOD. If you are not deliberately inclusive, you will be accidentally exclusive. And yes, it is a lot of work to retrain your brain to use they, them, and neopronouns. And yes, it is another thing you have to sit back and think about when it comes to how much diversity is actually represented in this game. Like when I was, Dave and I've talked about this before, I was running a module, and after like reading through it twice, it was a pre-made module that I had bought, and I got really mad because I'm like, there's exactly one woman character NPC in this entire arc, and she casts a command spell on you. Basically, she casts a spell that takes away your free will and then fucks off. Every other character in this is male. How do I fix that? How do I make this better? And again, that's something that a very good friend of mine, who is one of the best DMs I know, recommended this module to me. She had been running this module for years. That had never occurred to her. And she's a diversity expert too. It's just something that you have to think about and something you have to actually put your mind to. And that can be a lot of work. And there's definitely this thing of like, it's fine. It's been fine, right? All this time, it has worked fine. No one has complained, so why should I? But let me tell you, when I took a main character from that, made it there was a mystery around this NPC to start with, and I just kind of dropped a transitioning story into there. It worked fine. I stuck it in. Characters were trying to figure out, oh, well, did this unknown woman kill this character and take over this thing? And then they found out, no, they just transitioned to being a woman. One of the viewers of this show actually was in the audience when I dropped that reveal and is trans and was like, oh my gosh. And like, knowing that you brought that kind of joy to someone, knowing that you have made someone seen, and I didn't have to do it, and not having that wasn't hurting anyone, but identifying that, figuring out a way to make it better, and then figuring out a way to work that story in a meaningful way, not only made the story itself better, because there was actually a mystery to it now. It wasn't just, where is this person? It's like, oh, there's a whole story behind it. It made the entire module that much more interesting. It also made someone seen. And that's such a good feeling. I can't recommend enough finding ways to bring that feeling into your life. And when you take those chances, there's a chance that you will do it wrong and you will hurt someone's feelings, and good intentions doesn't mean that you will not cause harm. But if that happens, you take that on board, you learn and you do better, and your next one will be better. That's my lecture. David, say something.
One thing that I've had trouble wrapping my head around, especially in the TTRPG space, especially in the fantasy space, is all this pushback, like you talked about, when it comes to diversity. But to look at things in a more like mercenary sort of way, why would you cut yourself off from the best champions you can have? Because like, consider the male female divide. You know, it's mostly 50% one, mostly 50% the other. Why would you cut off half of your audience? Why would you prevent yourself from cultivating really awesome cheerleaders from one side versus the other? this doesn't have to be a space. And all fiction and storytelling, none of it has to be a space that is targeted to a particular quadrant or and why wouldn't you want someone who is seen, someone who um, can't point to any other representation and go, but here, this is where I felt seen. And then that person tells all of their friends, and all of their friends hold this up as a sign of representation. Like, Kay and I have talked about various creative endeavors that we have, whether it is writing or TTRPGs, publishing, lots of different things we've discussed over the years. And one thing that she and I have both repeated over the years is we don't want to make something that only a very narrow set of people is going to enjoy. We want to make something whereby everyone who sits down and watches it gets something from it. Um, and you hear about this in like movie marketing. It's like, okay, what quadrants are we targeting? Um, and what different types of people are we going to court? And one of the biggest revelations that they had in the film industry is when they realized that they could make kids movies that parents enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
And the second they figured that out, revenues for kids movies just skyrocketed. And you had companies like Pixar and DreamWorks just make money hand over fist. Like, who here has not heard or seen a Shrek meme this year? That
So
movie's what,
this
20 years old?
month, this
Right,
month,
right.
we're 7 days
Um,
into it. I promise you've seen a Shrek meme.
right. And so it's like, why limit yourself? Why, like, if your vision is to talk to a very, very narrow group of people, to just preach to your own choir, then go do that. And know that you will be in a dark corner of the internet that no one else is going to look for. But I want to put something out, and Kay and I think have done this already, where all sorts of people are interested. You know, we've had um, animators and artists and musicians and writers all watch our stuff and engaged with it and talked to us about it and been excited about it. And I don't want to make something where it's like, well, only writers are going to be interested in this. Only writers are going to get this. And you know, there's also the whole idea of I have friends who are trans. I have friends who are women. I have friends who are non-binary and gender fluid and queer and gay and ace, um, and so on. And it's just like, why would I build something that isn't for my peers? Why would I build something that isn't for my people? And so if you're saying to yourself, well, I don't want all this like inclusion in my stuff, then start looking around and seeing who your people are. And I'm not saying you got to go out and find the nearest black person and be like, okay, you're my token now, but maybe make something that you know the black and the Latin and the LGBT community won't all roll their eyes at. Um,
Yep. So, unfortunately, that is a great place to keep rolling. But I gotta get ready to go help set up for the
yep.
Rainbow Roll. So, again, Rainbow Roll is happening tonight in just under an hour at twitch.tv/Todd Moonbounce. If you're watching this video, go to Todd's channel, his YouTube, and watch the VOD. It's gonna be heckin' amazing. Tonight is a game run by that Candace girl. It features the Hype Goblin, Prince X Calamity, Lizard Librarian, and Aldermancy. It is going to be hecking amazing. Also, it is a charity game. Your donations will directly impact the game through things like level ups and rerolls, but you can also trigger a thirsty haiku. And some of those thirsty haikus were donated by our very own David Lee, who doesn't really want the credit for it, but I'm making him take the credit for it.
That's fine.
They made Candace go, oh my. A few of them. There were some wholesome ones too, but those weren't her favorite. So, please join us for Rainbow Roll tonight and every Tuesday this month. I will be playing next week along with Jen Mack, Candace herself, Connie Chang as our GM, and Naomi Kyle, who I can't believe agreed to play with us. So many amazing games happening this month. Again, Wednesdays, right here. Come back at 7 p.m. for Strixhaven, a homebrew world run by Other Side Steve. That, Mechs and Mayhem. It's a good heck of time. I play a himbo with a baby dragon. What can go wrong there? And later this month, on the 22nd, you can find me on the Emergency Power Podcast playing my non-binary pan stellar mess. Just the worst character they could have left. Like, incredibly high charisma, no tolerance for bullshit from anyone but themselves. Incredibly flirtatious. It's a problem. They're a real problem, and I love them so much. Yes, and then come back here Tuesdays. We'll do a short one. Oh, we are going to be putting out polls. Please, if you don't follow me on Twitter, it's KDamnFear. It's going to turn over here in just a second. We're going to be putting out polls because these are shorter episodes. We want to hear from you. We're going to throw out some Pride things, and we want to hear, like, what do you want us to talk about? And we'll probably make more of a habit of doing, like, hey, what should we talk about kind of polls. And then after June, after all of the bananas that's going on, we're going to go back to having some more guests. And I've got a few exciting guests hopefully lined up. I don't know. David might have to put on a clean shirt for one or two of them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, chat, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Thank you so much for all of your input. Thank you so much for nerding over Star Trek with us. Like, that is... We could absolutely turn this into a Star Trek
easy
talk show, and we'd all be very, very happy. I was very nearly... I'm so sad it's not happening. I know Sauce isn't in the chat tonight, so I can say it. We were going to potentially do a Starjammers game that was based off of Deep Space Nine. And it would have been amazing. If anyone wants to run that game...
Right.
I want to play Spelljammers based on DS9 so badly. I will play... I've lost his name. The doctor.
Garrick.
Balak?
Oh, no, Bashir.
Bashir! I want to play a Bashir so badly.
Dr. Julian Bashir.
I know, Julian, yes. I know exactly how I would play this character. I know what their class would be. Can't wait. Sounds like the cops are coming for me. I need to wrap this up. Thank you all for watching. I'm Kay. I've done my whole thing. David, you can find David over at Full Rubber Ducky. David is amazing. Manhattan is so freaking loud, y'all. And, be good to each other. Be kind. Thank you, Domo, for doing the amazing art for Rainbow Roll, and I will see you in just under an hour over on Todd's channel, where we're gonna play some thirsty sword lesbians, and I hope y'all is real thirsty, because it's gonna be a good time. So, that's all for this one. We will see you next week. Thank you again. Hi, y'all. Thank you to Web Captioner for the captions.